I want to start by introducing AFP, but unfortunately, I was going to show you some stories of in various languages that we do of AFP checks, and it so happens that today is the global site maintenance at AFP, Murphy's Law, so I cannot show you the stories, unfortunately, but anyway, we will manage. And if I may, I would share my screen with you and sort of start with just kind of talking about AFP and the scope of our operation in the various countries and the development of fact-checking there. So let me start with that. I hope it's going to work. Yes. Are you all seeing that?
Yes.
Okay, great. So I will start at the beginning. And actually, first of all, I will introduce the agency itself. AFP, as you know, Agence France Presse, is today the oldest global news agency still in existence. I think it was established in 1835 in Paris as Havas, which is and it remained so until 1944 when it split up from what is today the Global Advertising Agency, and it became Agence France Presse. And today the agency has some almost 2,500 staff worldwide, 100 different nationalities, located in across over 150 countries. And so this is really crucial because as disinformation and fake news turned into a major concern in the past decade and it became very global, it became clear at some point that an agency of this magnitude can really, with solid ground to build its has a solid ground to build its fact-check operation on, and can really take advantage of its scope and of the many different languages that its journalists speak and the sort of the ground knowledge they have in all these different countries. So it was only logical that we get into the business of fact-checking, and we were not the first. We were actually quite slow to get into it. But once AFP sort of put its mind into the operation, it grew very quickly. So let me show you the development. In 2017, so as you see, we did get into it quite late. I mean, AFP did some fact-checking before it was actually called that in its regular stories, but the fact-checking arm itself was established in 2017 with one person, one French speaker in Paris. But by the following year, it had 3 major languages: English, Spanish, Portuguese. So as you can see, it was pretty much in all these countries that speak these languages. And the year after, we were already in 42 languages. 42 countries. And the year after that, last year, which is when I joined AFP, as you can see, we expanded into 23 countries in the world. And this expansion continues so that today we have 23 languages. Just this past few weeks, we welcomed colleagues in Greece, Finland, and Sweden. And so, as you can see, we are now operating in 84 countries doing uniquely fact checks. We have over 100 journalists, and we operate in 23 languages. So, some of our competitors, this sort of localized operation distinguishes us from some of our global competitors like AP or Reuters. These agencies also do fact checking, and some of them are also global partners of Facebook like we are, but they only do it in English. And we took a different route because, as anyone dealing professionally with this information will tell you, that it's incredibly important that the fact checks be done in local language. Since the fake themselves sort of spread in the language, and the very reason that they spread is that a lot of the users, the social media users who spread them further, are not necessarily very savvy, internet savvy, and they often don't speak any other language. So they do not have the tools to sort of verify information themselves in any other language but their own. So it makes all the sense in the world to do the fact checks in the language and supply it to the explanations to them in the language that they speak. It's also important, I would say, for the credibility of the fact checkers, because if as you know, people who share this information and not necessarily intentionally, but just because they don't know, if you just like throw something in English at them or any other language without an explanation, they will only be insulted and they will not accept that as an explanation. So it's very important for fact checkers, I think, to be sort of close to their users and to treat them as equal partners and to really explain things in the language that they understand, to put it simply. So on the other hand, it's also very, I would say, advantageous for a fact checker such as myself to work for an agency that is truly global, because, as I said, 23 languages around the world. As you know, the fakes often travel quite quickly across the globe and get translated, sometimes badly, into the local languages, so that we as fact checkers, when we come across something that clearly did not originate in our country, chances are it already appeared somewhere else. And at AFP, we very often, I put out feelers and I ask my colleagues, have you come across this already? And very often it so happens that the story has already been written by someone else. The debunk was made by somebody else, and all I really have to do is translate it and adapt it to, in my case, Czech reality, the Czech context. So that is a great advantage of working for a global agency, because I have all this incredible sort of depth of resources that I can draw upon. Sometimes, here we are talking specifically about fake news about COVID, which, has since the outbreak of the disease, it has become more than 90% of fake news that is being shared everywhere, Czech Republic included. So all these videos that originate somewhere else, I sometimes look at something and it's in a language that I don't understand, for example. So I don't know what's going on there. All I have to do is send a message to our global network and ask, could anyone help me identify this language, for example, and tell me what's going on in this video. And in a couple of hours, I have the answer, which is fantastic. And then I can work with that, and I can determine whether the claim is false or whether it's a hoax or what have you. Same thing if I, for example, come across a video that is in Arabic, there is something written in Arabic or in Hebrew. All I have to do is pick up a phone and call our local bureau in Jerusalem or whatever country I suspect that this is happening in, and they will tell me or help me locate the local resources, local sources that I can call and find out what's going on. So this, I think, just to sort of show that working in local languages has real advantages for the global operation as well. And now, so by this time, we do about 19 to 20 fact checks per day globally. And this may not sound like much given the size of our agency. As I said, we now have 104 fact checkers across the globe. But you have to realize that our fact checks, which I unfortunately cannot show you because of the site maintenance, are fully researched stories. And sometimes they're quite long because they deal with multiple false claims. For example, you have an hour-long video of supposed doctors and experts talking about how some vaccine or other is causing miscarriages or seizures in people. And you have to go claim by claim, and you really have to make your debunk bulletproof to be credible. So you have to call experts, you have to search for data. And these kinds of stories can take days to write, to research and write. We actually think that 20 stories a day produced by our agency is a pretty impressive number, given the circumstances that we work under and given the sheer number of claims that is out there. Okay, so here very quickly, I would show you the geographical location. So this is Asia and Oceania. This is Africa, and this is Europe. As you can see, we are in most of Europe now. The reasons why we're not in places like Italy, for example, is because they already have a very developed market for fact checkers. So they don't see any need to have a further fact checker there. But otherwise we're in most of Europe. The conspicuous place that we are not, and let's look at the local global map, is of course Russia and China. And that is because, of course, these are very difficult environments, quite hostile environment, not necessarily, not only easy, but sometimes not possible to work under those circumstances as fact checkers, although AFP does, of course, have wire journalists on the ground. Okay, now, I mentioned Facebook. And this is a very important point. AFP is one of the 60 plus agencies or news outlets that are an official partner of Facebook for fact checking. And the way it works is we're a third-party fact checker, which means that we are hired for our services by that company, and that we have the ability to, once we debunk a false story, we have the ability to mark it as false on Facebook and attach our story to it as an explanation of why it is false. And the result looks like something like this. As you can see, once a post is marked as false, it is sort of covered over by this special screen that is similar to, videos that, for example, have sensitive content, violence or whatever, that you first have to consent to see it here if you want to. Or you can choose to see why it is false, and that will take you to our story, which explains what is false about it and why the information is incorrect or why it's misinformation. So I often get angry emails from people whose stories have been covered with this screen and were marked, whose stories were marked as false. They're complaining that I'm erasing their post from Facebook, but that is incorrect. I do not have that power, nor would I want to. I'm simply marking it as false. The posts stay there on their profiles, but they have this story attached to them that explains why they're false. And it is true that Facebook, once one of their verified fact checkers marks a post as false, it changes the post's algorithm, and that reduces its visibility or its ability to be shared by 80%, up to 80%. So yes, and also if that story is nevertheless reshared, this notification pops up also on that person's profile. And if there is a profile that consistently shares fake stories, that it can actually be either banned from Facebook or temporarily shut down, or they can be banned from monetizing their content. However, I have to admit that this is still work in progress, that Facebook is not necessarily doing that. And I know that from my own experience, because there are certain profiles and certain websites that whose content I debunk quite consistently, and it is still alive and well on Facebook. So this is something that we can communicate to Facebook as their third-party fact checkers, but we have no control over whether they will stay on Facebook or not. This is often a mistake people make, that they sort of equate the fact checkers with Facebook itself, but it is not so. We do not own the company. We're not part of the company in any way. They are our clients. They're a very important client. And of course they pay for our services, but we are not part of Facebook. To be a Facebook official partner, you have to pass a very sort of rigorous code of principles. We are part of this IFCN, International Fact-Checking Network, along with tens of other global fact checkers. And the code of principles is quite important. You cannot become a partner of Facebook if you don't adhere to these principles. So one of them, of course, non-partisanship, fairness. We have no agenda. AFP is a news agency, as you say. It is it's been established by the French state, and it is still 40% controlled by the French state. And it has some government appointees on the board, but it is not a partisan organization in any way. It is completely independent. Now, the second one is transparency, and that's the transparency of sources, which means that every time I, for example, write a story, write a debunk, I have to clearly identify whom I spoke to, what organization they belong. Like in any news story, it's exactly the same. I cannot quote anonymous sources as our wire journalists sometimes can, but for fact checkers, this is actually the requirements are much more rigorous. So I have to clearly identify everyone by name and by the organization that they belong to. I cannot write any unattributed claims. Everything has to be attributed. I have to explain the transparency of methodology is also very important. I have to clearly explain how I found out, how I arrived at the conclusion that I arrived at, how I found out things, what methods I used, and transparency of sources. We have to be clear that AFP is a public company, even though it has the French state has a minority stake in it, and that we are not beholden to any one particular organization, and we're not carrying its agenda. And a very important point is also honest corrections policy. As a fact checker, you want to be completely transparent and honest. You have to be beyond reproach. If you ever make a mistake, which is human, and your fact checkers are humans, you have to come clean right away, correct it. If it turns out that your fact check was actually inaccurate, you retract the story and publish a correction. This is very important. And now, this is a very interesting point. How do we choose which stories we debunk? The stories that have the most impact are, of course, have a priority, and impact is measured by several different criteria. A very important one is how we look at how viral the posts are, how many shares, how many reposts, etc. We would not generally at AFP we would not bother about posts with a couple dozen shares. Mostly we concentrate on posts with thousands or tens of thousands shares. Although this of course depends on the language and the market. I mean, there are big countries, the criteria are different there than Czech Republic, for example, where a few hundred shares is already a decently shared story. But the other criteria is whether the post has potential for serious harm. And if we see a story like that, for example, if there is a potentially even a criminal post, false post about, let's say, a retirement home killing its residents with vaccines, and 75 people died in this retirement home in northern Moravia, and nobody is talking about it. Now that is a falsehood that can cause potential serious harm, and in such a case, we would look at such post, even if it's not necessarily yet widely shared, but it has a potential. We can see that it is being shared in real time. We would go and try to debunk such a false story and mark it as false as quickly as possible to stop it spreading further and causing harm. In general, we stay away from harmless posts, even if they're hoaxes. For example, there was a few months ago, there was a very viral post, which was a photo showing a young couple, and the post said something like, "I lost a photo of my grandparents at this railway station. Has anyone found it?" And it turned out the photo was actually a still from the movie Back to the Future. So it was very widely shared, but we decided not to debunk it, although it was a clear-cut case of a hoax, because it was harmless. It wasn't really doing any harm to anyone. But sometimes marking even relatively harmless posts can be useful as a reminder of how you should always check your sources. I once debunked a doctored photo of our finance minister, supposedly wearing an outfit that made her look like she was wearing a Czech flag. And this photo was very widely shared by people who don't normally fall for false information, who are actually, who are normally quite savvy in using social media, etc. And so I thought that this was actually a useful debunk, because it was a useful reminder that even these otherwise sophisticated users should be careful what they share, because they really did believe that she was wearing a Czech flag. And let me tell you, I never received so much hate mail as I did for that story, because people were shocked. Suddenly, they look at their Facebook page and they see that they shared false information, and these are people who are not used to doing that. So sometimes it's a useful reminder that you should always be careful about what you are sharing, and that people are fallible. So that was a sort of a kind of a unique case, but generally we do try to focus on harmful fear-mongering posts, videos like doctors talking about the harm that vaccines can cause, including losses of fertility or seizures in children, etc. And we try we focus on these kind of posts that really do scare people. So I think I already mentioned this. So how do I find stories that I debunk in the Czech Republic? Most of it really does come from, I monitor social media, of course. I monitor the usual suspect groups that often share false information. There are profiles that are specific, or websites that are specifically dedicated to sharing false information. We have talked about, you already talked about this extensively in your morning session, so I'm not going to go into that necessarily into detail, but this is a reliable source of false news, of course. I get tips from the public sometimes, and I also get, I sort of, because we work with Facebook, we have access to their internal sort of tip-off site, which monitors potentially fake news that users themselves can alert them to. And so this can be filtered by language, which also gives me the added advantage of seeing what is being shared in other parts of Europe or the world. And you can immediately see how widely these posts are shared. And so there is, to sort of conclude, there is no shortage of fake news to choose from. And, you know, as I said, it is, because of our rigorous standards, it is impossible to debunk more than a fraction of what is being shared every day. That's the truth, but that is why we try to focus on the most, either on the most dangerous or the most widely shared posts. So I guess in conclusion, I would just like to stress again that working for a global agency such as AFP has many advantages. You know, we have access to some proprietary tools for analyzing videos and photos, for example. You know, AI, we have extensive technical support, but I would say that the biggest wealth is our people, because our power of crowdsourcing is just incredible, because we have all these journalists around the world, and they are people who speak the local language, and they have the local knowledge, and they have access to the local sources. So they are, not only can they help us with you know, reaching the right people or explaining what's going on in any particular post, but they themselves can be very apt in identifying fake news and alerting us to it. So that has made our common effort to combat fake news incredibly efficient and effective. And AFP, as I've heard, is not done. It will grow. It will keep growing, because unfortunately, fake news is not going away. On the contrary,